Alright, so today's tutorial is going to be working on a little bit more Python, specifically about strings and taking input from the user. So if you want to head to cs20.ca and then scroll down until you get to string operators and assignment work time. So we're basically going to cover these three topics today. So they won't take all that long, hopefully, but start right here with string operators and assignment work time. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the plus sign and the asterisks and what those mean when we're dealing with strings. So we did refer to this before, but it's worth refreshing our memory and just making sure that we're good to go on this. So I'm going to have you take a look at this. I'm going to type in hey the first time, and I'm also going to type in 15. So I'll do hey the first time and I'll do 15 the second time. So when we run this, if you want to pause it for a second and think about what might happen first, and then press resume in a moment. All right, so if we run this and I type in hey, and I hit OK, you're going to notice that what I end up getting is hey, 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 hey 4 times. And the reason is that input, this function, will always get us a string. And so if you have a string and then the asterisk, which normally would mean multiplication, and then a 4, that means that whatever this string is, I want to repeat it 4 times. So this asterisk just means repeat if the left-hand side is a string. So even if I type in the number 15, oops, and I hit OK, now I'm going to get 15 4 times. Because again, input gave me a string, so this is a string repeated 4 times is how I can think of that. If I wanted it to behave like a number, what I would do is I would say number equals the integer version of number, in which case when I run this and I type in 15, the input is first going to give us a string, so number would be a string, but then we convert it to the integer version of a number. So now when I call this changed value number times 4, this is going to be an integer times 4, and that's why we're going to get 60 this time. Okay, now let's try this one as well. On this one, if you think about what just happened in the last one, I'm going to type in a 3 and a 5 when I run this code. So think about what just happened, and hopefully you can sort out what's about to happen now. Press pause, think about it, and then resume. So here, if we type in a 3, and then I type in a 5 as our second number, what we're going to get is 3, 5. It looks like 35. And the reason for that is, once again, input gives us a string. So number 1 and number 2 are both strings. So when I say combined value equals number 1 plus number 2, this addition sign, it doesn't actually add because these are not numbers, these are strings. So instead it does concatenation, which is a big fancy word that means join. In other words, it squishes them together, and so that's why we get 3, 5. Again, if we wanted it to behave the way that you might think it should behave, namely adding, I would have to convert both of these into integers or floats. So if I said number 1 equals the integer version of number 1, and number 2 is the integer version of number 2, and then I ran this again, and I still type in a 3 and a 5, now I would get an 8, because again, this is now an integer, that's an integer, so this symbol now looks at both sides and says, oh, they're both integers, let's actually do addition now, and so we get the 8. All right, and let's try one more here. So here, we're asking for a first name and a second name, first and last name here, and then we combine them together using this plus sign. Again, since they're going to be strings, then that's going to concatenate or join them together. And then we'll finally print out good to see you with the full name. So if I were to do this and type in my name, I would get good to see you, Dan Schellenberg, but it would be all squished together. So the way to fix that is when we do full name here, for example, to put a space right here in between the N and the capital S, all I would do is I would concatenate an extra space. So we can concatenate as many times as we want together like this, works just fine. And then here, after good to see you, I could just add an additional space there. So if you run this now, you'd get Dan Schellenberg again, and that should work just fine. Okay, so that's basically all that we need to worry about for these ones. How does the, again, multiplication symbol with string on the left side means how many times to repeat, and the addition sign means we're going to concatenate or join these things together. And really that's all that I'm going through in the rest of this page here. So if you want, you're welcome to take a look at this, but that's the big idea. So I'm going to hit the next button here. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can take in user input in other ways. So as I've said, whenever you take input from the user using that built-in input command, it's always going to be a string. And if you were to go into Thonny for a second, and I'm just going to type something in here similar to what we just did. So I'm going to say name equals input, and then what's your name? A space there so it looks okay, and then I'll just print something out that says like hello there, and I'll concatenate name like that. So if we run this, it's going to pop up in our little console here and say what's your name. We type in whatever and it prints out our thing. Now that's fine if I want to do console input. In other words, if I'm okay with just typing stuff inside the shell here. But what if I want to make my program look a little bit nicer and actually pop up a window, like a dialog box that asks us for information? And really that's what this next part is all about. So this Easy GUI QT, the GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. So this is really saying like, how can I take graphical input from the user in an easy way is really what's going to happen in this code. So we're going to try to figure that out in this section here. So before we do, let's just take a quick look at one or two of these things to make sure that we understand what's going on. So I'm going to try this code here with these values that you see right there. So what you should do is pause the video, think about what each one is going to do, and then hit resume. Okay, so let's try it first with the number 42. So 42 right here, when we run that, what we're going to get is 42 less than 10? No, it's not. elif, is it less than 40? No, it's not. elif, is it less than 70? Yes, it is. So that means that what I'm going to do is I'm going to set x to be whatever x used to be minus 10. And so that means from the 42, I've taken away 10. So now I'm at 32. And you'll notice that here, this is one big if, elif, else. Only one of those branches can occur. So we were asking each of these questions in turn. Now that this one came back as true, that means we're going to ignore the rest of these, and we'll just jump down to here and print out the 32, which is why we have what we have there. Okay, now let's try it again with a 32 this time. So again, think about what this is going to do. So you might want to pause it if you haven't thought this one through, and I'll run it with 32. And now let's talk this through. So how do we know what it's going to do? Well, is 32 less than 10? No. Is it less than 40? Yes, it is. And so now we're going to say x is equal to x plus 5. So 32 plus 5 is 37. And now because this is if, elif, else, I can only do one of these branches. So since this one triggered as true, I skip everything else and I just print out the 37. So that's why it's a 37 there. Let's try it with a 2. If I run this as a 2, now if x is less than 10, yes it is. So 2 is less than 10, so we're going to run this. X is equal to whatever it used to be, which was a 2 plus 10, so I'll get a 12. And once more, I'd skip all the rest of these elif else. So hopefully all that makes sense. You could try it once more with an 82 if you wanted. And when we run that, again, we'd ask all these questions in order. 82 is not less than 10, not less than 40, 82 is not less than 70, but 82 is less than 100. So we'd take 5 away from the 82, so we'd be sitting here at 77, and we'd skip the else. And the very last one, if I were to put in 142, that's not less than 10, not less than 40, it's not less than 70, and it's not less than 100. So I've finally made it all the way down to this else here. So when I run this, there's actually going to be 2 things that get printed. We're going to see big number and 142. So don't forget that in if, elif, else, only one of those branches can occur. So we did just this branch here, but since the print x was outside, it ran no matter what. Okay, and a couple more. let's say we ran this. If we put in a 16, for example, this is just going to concatenate a few times. So we concatenate this string here with, remember, input takes a string. So with the string age, so we chuck that 16 in there and then concatenate with that string. So again, you can concatenate as many times as you want. Here, there's one important thing for us to remember, as we just said. So pause this, think about what's going to happen when you run 17 or 14. Feel free to try to fix it yourself before you continue this video. So if I run this and I put in a 17, I'm going to get, wow, already 17 years old. And it looks like everything's okay, but then let's try this with a 14. And I get, uh-oh, wow, already 14 years old. That doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, because here we said if age is greater than 15. The reason that this happens is that our age is not actually a number, it's a string. So that means that when we try to compare this string with a number, weird things happen. So what you need to do here in order to make this work is you need to say, okay, let's set age to be the integer version of age so that I can do this comparison now. So then if we run this, we're going to get a different fun error. So if I typed in 14, nothing should happen because age is not greater than 15. But if I type in 17, now it's going to throw an error that says can't concatenate string and int on line 4. So that's right here. So since this thing right here is not a string, then I have to, well, Python freaks out because it sees a string and an integer and doesn't know what this plus sign is supposed to mean. So there's a few ways around it. One of them is going to be to convert this temporarily to a string just when I want to concatenate it. So if I did that and I typed in a 17, this would work just fine. Another way to do this would be for me to say, okay, well, I don't really care to convert this thing to a string because I'm not really going to do that for very much. So I could instead change these to commas, in which case you can combine any data type and it will work out okay. So if I do this, but you'll notice that it chucked in extra spaces here. So if you use the comma, you don't want to have those spaces there because the comma will automatically throw in spaces. So something like this would be more accurate in that case. Okay, so all of that hopefully gets us remembering at the start of the week here how we deal with Python and all the things we've learned so far. Let's do one last thing, and that is getting the user input with Easy GUI Qt. So just like we had a library tab when we were playing in Reborg, and so here, if you had like turn right defined inside the library, we could call like from library import turn right, or even better, we could call import library and then say library.turnright. So in other words, you're thinking from the library tab, I want to run this function turn right, is how you can imagine that. Now, we can also, if we'd prefer, we can do like import library as lib and then call lib.turnright just so we don't have to type so much code. And we're going to use something very similar to this style when we start taking in input from the user using a graphical interface. So what you need to do is install CS20 Easy GUI. So in order to do that, you need to open up Thonny. And inside of Thonny, you're going to click on Tools, hit Manage Packages, and then in here, you're just going to type CS20-Easy GUI, hit Search on PyPy, and there we go, CS20 Easy GUI, that's the one right there, so I'll click on that, and then I'm just going to hit Install. Now, I already have it installed, but just click on Install, and it should run just fine. It'll take a moment, but once it's finished installing, keep going on this video. Now what we can do is, let's say that I wanted to take in the user's name, but I wanted to do it graphically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import Easy GUI Qt as easy. So what am I doing there? Well, again, very much the same thing as you saw here, where we said import library as lib. What I'm doing is we installed a module called Easy GUI Qt, and I'm just saying I don't really want to type that every time, so instead let's just call it easy to make this simple on ourselves. Then what I can do is anywhere where I used to have like an input, I can just say easy dot get, and in this case, the thing that I'm looking for is a string. So I'll say easy dot get string, and now I can ask what's your name. If I run this, and we give it a go, you're going to see a little window pop up that asks what's your name. I can type in Dan, for example, and I would get hello there, Dan, and it works just fine. Now I do get some odd problem encountered in my config, but that should be insignificant for what we're doing right now. Now what if I wanted to, instead of showing this string here down in the console, what if I wanted to pop up a message that did that? Well, similarly, instead of a print, I could call easy.showMessage and then put that message graphically. So if I do that and I type in my name, now I'm going to get a little window that pops up and says, hello there, Dan. Wonderful. So this is the basics of how I would use Easy GUI, and I'll just save this as GUI input or something like that. There we go. So that now you can use this. So I'll push this up to GitHub so you can see this demo if I've confused you at all. But that's the basic idea, is that now we can use that in order to grab information from the user. So the one that I just showed you was getString. There are other methods you can use as well. So for example, you could get a choice. So if you had a list of things, like a whole bunch of different subjects, you could call easy.getChoice and ask, what's your favorite thing? That's going to be the prompt, the thing that it asks. Then pick subject would be the title of that window. And the choices is this list of information here, these list of things that you could have, which would look like that. If you're curious, you could just copy and paste this. And if we chucked that into Thonny, here's how it would look if we ran that. So you'd get what is your fave as the prompt. The window title is pick subject, and then here we have our list of all our different things, and we can select it, and there we go. We get something like that. Okay, so now we can ask the user a whole bunch of more, I guess, graphical ways of giving information. There are a few others that you can use. So I did make a Easy GUI Qt reference. So what that looks like is this right here, and it gives a whole bunch of information about all the different things that you can ask. So feel free to look at that. Another way to get there is just from the main CS20 webpage. If you scroll all the way down to the very bottom under appendices, you'll see this Easy GUI Qt reference, and that's what I was linking to there. But for our purposes, these ones here are kind of the biggest things that you need to worry about. So how can I get a string, get an integer, get a float, or if you want a true or false, get yes or no, and then show message here. So just to show you how that looks, let's say that we did a get integer. So I'll undo this. And so here I got a name, and I could also get like an age, for example, and call easy.getInt. How old are you? And so if I did that and I said, hello there, and I'll just leave it as name. So I won't bother doing anything with the age, but I'll just show you what it looks like. So if we run this, what we're going to get is we can type in our name. And then now when you get how old are you, you can try typing other letters. It's not going to work. But if you put in a number like 16, that's going to work just fine. Okay, so using this Easy GUI Qt, that allows you to now really dial into what you want to ask the user, and you can force them to only enter in an integer or only force them to enter in a float, for example, so that now you already have this not as an integer the way that our other input was, but this age would now actually be an integer, not a string. Okay, so hopefully that's useful to you. All right, and there's one last thing that I'm going to talk about today, and I realize that I've been going with quite a few things, but the very last thing is on our next page here, and I'm just going to skip past all these different types of strings. I'll just mention really quickly that you could use a single quote, a double quote, triple quotes of either style. All of these are just strings, so you can use them in any way you want. And if you're curious, you can look on here for more details. But the important thing that we need to worry about is this right here, is the idea of an F string. And so I'm just going to copy this code right here, and I'm going to put that into Thonny, and I'll explain what's going on here. So if we save that, and I'll just call that F strings. Okay, so what this is going to do is, if you have name being Eli, age being 14, what you can do is you can put the value of each of these variables, regardless of their data type, into a string like I just did here, where at the start of the string, before the quotes, you put an F to say this thing is a formatted string, is what that stands for. And then that tells Python to look for these little squiggly brackets, and anywhere it finds them, it's going to look inside to see the variable that it's trying to replace. And the same thing here. So if you run this, what you would get is, hello Eli, I heard you just turned 14. So it's replaced the value of name and of age inside here. You will very likely find that this is a super handy way for you to format your strings without having to do a whole ton of concatenation. You can just use values of variables inside your strings. Makes life a lot easier. Okay, so there we are. That's the end of the tutorial today. However, it's probably worth my while to just open up Canvas. So this is just to make sure that everyone's feeling confident with what's going on in Canvas here. So the next assignment that you're going to be working on is this Mad Lib. So hopefully most of you have finished off the temperature converter. And if not, you should finish that today. But right now you want to start looking at this Mad Lib as well. So basically what a Mad Lib is, and I'll just open this up and talk through it. So the essential idea is that you're going to take in input from the user, and then you're going to output stuff that's going to be, funny in some way or another. So for example, a classic Old MacDonald rhyme would be this: Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a cow, E-I-E-I-O, etc. Okay? The way a Mad Lib would work is you would take in input from the user. So you might ask for an adjective, and they might type in post-war. You might ask for a noun, and they might type in dog toy. You might ask for an animal. They could say red-tailed catfish or whatever. Noise might say crack. And then at the end of all that, you would print out post-war MacDonald had a dog toy, E-I-E-I-O, etc. And so anywhere where it used to be like Old MacDonald, you are now replacing that with post-war MacDonald. So you've used this adjective here. And anywhere where we used to have a moo moo, you've replaced it with crack, like this. Okay? And so really that's the idea of a Mad Lib, is you take some well-known thing and you replace some part of it with the user input. And so in your version of this, you need to have two different Mad Libs. So when you run your program, you ask the user, do you want Mad Lib 1 or Mad Lib 2? Then, after they say which one they want, you start taking in input from the user. For our purposes, I've asked you to make sure that you take in anywhere from 5 to 10 words. So keep it somewhere in there. You can use an old rhyme. You can use a story you make up. It doesn't really matter. But in the end, what it's going to be is just something that hopefully makes sense at the end of it all. Okay? Beyond that, the extra for experts, once you have the basic version running where you can use either Mad Lib and it all works, the next thing to do is to see if you can figure out a way to bring in random words for the user as well. So if the user doesn't want to type in their own words, you could also do this extra for experts here, and I've given some links that'll get you started. If you have any questions, please get in touch, but hopefully that all makes sense for today. Have a good day, everyone.